Dawn bled across the Bosphorus like a wounded sky. The waters below, once shimmering with the reflections of empire, now carried only the ghost of a fading light. Above them, the domes and spires of Constantinople stood in silence. Veiled in smoke and morning mist, the wind that swept across the Golden Horn was cold and heavy. With omen, it carried the scent of iron, salt, and coming fire. For more than 1,000 years, this city had stood as the bridge between worlds, between East and West, faith and conquest, heaven and earth. It had survived Persians and Arabs, crusaders and plague, earthquakes and betrayal. But now, its walls were old, its coffers empty, its heart weary. The once golden empire of Byzantium had become a relic surrounded by enemies, clinging to its fading crown. As night gathered once more, from the Asian shore, the first shapes appeared, the black banners of the Ottoman host, rippling like wings of shadow. Their camps spread across the hills, tens of thousands strong, their fires burning in perfect rows. The ground trembled beneath the march of men and beasts, the deep thud of drums echoing through the straits. And from the highest tent, a single standard rose above them all, the crescent of Islam, bright against the storming sky. Within the city walls, bells tolled across empty streets. The last emperor, Constantine XI, prayed in the dim light of Hagia Sophia, beneath mosaics whose gold had begun to flake and fall like tears. Outside, the people gathered in hushed processions, clutching icons and relics as if faith itself could hold back fate. Far above the towers, a single raven wheeled through the dawn, its cry sharp and hollow, the ancient sound that had haunted every fall of kings. Below, soldiers manned their posts along the battered Theodosian walls, gazing eastward into the rising haze. There, beyond the horizon, thunder rolled not from heaven, but from iron. The siege had not yet begun, and yet the city already trembled beneath the weight of history. The world watched in silence, for it knew what was coming. An empire was about to meet its end, not with the roar of victory, but with the echo of destiny fulfilled. The sun rose red that morning, as if the sky itself remembered the glory it was about to bury. Once, Constantinople had been the light of the world, a city crowned in marble and gold, where emperors walked beneath mosaics that glowed like dawn. Its streets had echoed with processions of triumph. Its harbors teemed with ships from every corner of the earth. But that glory was now a distant echo, swallowed by centuries of war, greed, and time. By the year 1453, the empire that had outlived Rome was reduced to a shadow, a single city, surrounded by the rising power of the Turks. The empire of Byzantium had become a cage of faded saints and broken banners, its emperor ruling over ruins and memories. Once they had commanded the Mediterranean, now they commanded the walls. Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos stood as the last flame of a dying lineage, weary, proud, unyielding. He knew what history demanded of him. In the candlelight of his palace, he studied the maps of his ancestors, knowing full well there was nowhere left to retreat. His kingdom had no armies left to call, no gold to bribe allies, no fleet to challenge the sea, only faith, stone, and courage remained. Beyond the city's walls, the earth rumbled beneath the gathering of a storm. Sultan Mehmed II, barely 21, had already conquered more than kings twice his age. His eyes burned with a vision that reached beyond the horizon. He would be the one to claim the city that prophets, boots, and warriors had coveted for centuries. To him, Constantinople was not merely a city, it was destiny. In his foundries at Edirne, a monstrous weapon was forged, the Great Bombard, a cannon of bronze, so vast it took 60 oxen to drag it across the plains. When it roared, the earth itself shuddered. For centuries, the walls of Theodosius had defied the world, but now, for the first time, man had built something that could unmake them. Inside Constantinople, the people lived between hope and despair. They patched the ancient walls with timber and faith. Monks prayed without ceasing in Hagia Sophia, while children played in courtyards where grass now grew through the marble. They spoke of miracles, of angels, of the Virgin, who had protected the city for 1,000 years. But even miracles had begun to fade. The air of the empire was heavy with the scent of smoke and salt, the perfume of endings. Every sunrise felt like the last, and yet, within the silence of those crumbling streets, something remained a stubborn light, flickering against the dark. They called it faith, but in truth, it was defiance. The final breath of an empire that refused to die quietly. Across the plains of Thrace, the ground trembled with the thunder of thousands. Mehmed II had arrived, not as a prince seeking glory, but as a sovereign of destiny. His banners rippled like storms over a sea of men, janissaries in gleaming mail, horsemen draped in black and gold, engineers dragging the monstrous cannon that would soon roar the end of an age. Each spark struck from their wheels lit the dust like falling stars. The Sultan rode at the center, his gaze fixed upon the distant skyline of Constantinople. To him, the domes and walls were not stone, they were prophecy. The city his forefathers had failed to take, he would make his own. He saw it not merely as conquest, but as the will of heaven made flesh. At his command, trenches were dug, roads paved, bridges built. A city surrounded by the sea would be chained by earth and fire. Inside the walls, Constantine XI gathered what remained of his council. There was no army left to summon, no allies left to call. The Venetians had promised ships, but the seas were silent. The West, bound in its own wars, had turned its gaze away. Alone, the emperor faced a truth. No crown should bear that the world had forgotten Byzantium before it had even died. Yet in that solitude, he found resolve. He ordered every gate barred, every man armed. Citizens, priests, merchants, and monks stood side by side, sharpening blades and stacking stones. Across the city, bells rang out not in mourning, but in defiance. The emperor knew that surrender would mean life under another god, another law, another world, and so he chose the only road that still led to honor, to fight, and to fall standing. That night, torches burned along the ramparts, like stars against the dark. Priests carried icons to the walls, blessing soldiers with trembling hands. Mothers pressed crosses into their sons' palms. In the great church of Hagia Sophia, incense rose through shattered windows, the smoke mingling with the wind that smelled of powder and rain. Beyond the city, Mehmet walked alone through his camp. He looked toward the same horizon, toward the same walls, and knew that when dawn came, the history itself would change hands. Neither king would yield. Both had already stepped beyond fear, beyond reason, beyond mercy. And so, the world held its breath between faith and fire as two destinies prepared to collide beneath the same burning sky. At dawn on the 6th of April, 1453, the drums began. They rolled like thunder across the plains, rising and falling in waves that shook the air. From the hills of Galata to the marshes of the Propontis, the banners of the Ottoman Empire unfurled red, black, and gold beneath a storm-colored sky. The siege had begun. From the mouth of the giant cannon basilica, a pillar of fire erupted. The ground quaked. The walls of Theodosius, which had stood unbroken for 1,000 years, groaned beneath the blow. Smoke poured through the valleys. Dust rose like fog from another world. Each shot was a drumbeat of doom, tearing at the stones that had once defied empires. Mehmed watched in silence from his command tent. Around him, the ranks of the janissaries stood motionless, their faces painted with oil and ash, eyes fixed on the city that glimmered like a dying sun. Behind them stretched 80,000 men cavalry, engineers, gunners, sappers a tide of steel and faith. The young sultan had brought with him not only an army, but the full weight of history's turning wheel. Inside the city, the response came like a whisper of courage against a storm. Bells rang from the towers, calling the defenders to their posts. Giovanni Giustiniani, the Genoese captain, commanded the walls with calm precision. His mercenaries manned the battlements, repairing each breach as soon as it opened. Archers loosed their arrows from behind shattered parapets, while monks passed buckets of water to douse fires ignited by the enemy's bombard. By day, the roar of cannon split the air. By night, the glow of 1,000 campfires encircled the city like a burning crown. The Ottomans sang hymns of conquest. The Byzantines answered with prayers of salvation. Between them lay only the silence of the dead. For 40 days and nights, iron met faith. The Turks hurled stones and flames. The Christians answered with boiling oil and crossbows. With courage and desperation, the Golden Horn was chained shut, guarded by the last remnants of the Byzantine fleet, fragile ships against the empire of the Crescent. But Mehmed was patient. He ordered his men to drag ships across land, greasing the planks with animal fat, pulling entire vessels over the hills behind Galata. When dawn came, the defenders looked out in disbelief. The Turkish navy had appeared behind their chain. The circle was complete. The city of Constantine was no longer besieged, it was trapped. Smoke drifted over the domes like the breath of some ancient beast. Every tower, every church, every stone seemed to hold its own heartbeat, slow, trembling, defiant. Inside Hagia Sophia, the candles still burned. Priests whispered litanies. Children slept in the pews, and women wept before icons blackened by soot. Outside, the hammer of Islam kept striking, hour by hour, day by day. The walls crumbled, but the spirit behind them did not. And yet, everyone could feel it. The wind shifting, the ground trembling, the sky darkening with the weight of something final. History was gathering its breath, and soon it would roar. The morning of May 29, 1453 rose beneath a blood-red sky. The air was heavy, silent, waiting. From the Ottoman camps, torches still burned from the night before, a sea of light stretching to the horizon. Trumpets sounded in the dark, low and slow, like the heartbeat of a giant. Then came the drums closer, faster, relentless. Mehmed had given the order. The final assault had begun. From every side, the Ottoman army surged forward, a living tide of steel. The first wave crashed against the outer walls, irregular troops, slaves, and zealots sent to exhaust the defenders. Arrows blackened the sky. The roar of the basilica cannon tore through the dawn. Whole towers shook and fell, their stones tumbling like thunder into the trenches below. Behind them came the second wave, the Anatolian infantry, disciplined, fierce, carrying ladders, grappling hooks, and shields scorched by flame. They climbed into smoke and fire, their cries lost beneath the roar of iron. For every man that fell, two more took his place. On the walls, Giustiniani fought like a man possessed, sword in hand, his armor blackened with soot. He rallied his mercenaries and the last soldiers of Byzantium. Arrows pierced his shield. Cannon smoke blinded his eyes. Yet still he stood until a splinter of stone tore through his side, wounded and carried from the battlements. His men faltered. That moment broke the spell. The defenders, seeing their champion fall, began to waver. Constantine rode through the gates, his voice lost in the roar of chaos. He threw off the purple cloak of emperors and drew his sword. Those who saw him said his eyes burned with a strange calm, the calm of one who knows he will not see another dawn. The third wave advanced the Janissaries, the Sultan's chosen sons. Clad in black and crimson, they marched with perfect silence until they reached the walls, and then their cries split the heavens. They poured through the breach at St. Romanus Gate, over rubble and corpses, cutting their way into the city. Inside, Streets turned to rivers of smoke. Bells clanged in panic, then were silenced. By the roar of flame, the people fled toward Hagia Sophia, clutching relics and children. Overhead, the sun disappeared behind a veil of ash. Constantine fought to the last. In the narrow alleys near the Lycus River, he struck down invaders until the tide swallowed him. His body was never found. Only whispers remained that the last emperor fell as the first had risen, sword in hand, facing east. And then, it was over. The gates that had once welcomed emperors now opened to the conqueror. The banner of the crescent rose above the shattered walls, fluttering in the smoke. The hammer had struck, and the world had cracked. The city of Constantine, jewel of empires, guardian of faith, had fallen at last, and with it, the light of Byzantium sank beneath the shadow of a new age. When the walls finally broke, the world seemed to exhale. 1,000 years of defiance ended in a single morning. The soldiers of the crescent surged through the gates like a black flood. Their boots echoed across marble streets that had once carried emperors, scholas, and saints. The air was thick with smoke and prayer, one fading, one rising from every tower. The banners of Byzantium were torn down and replaced with the emblems of the Ottoman star and moon. Through the haze, Sultan Mehmed II rode toward the heart of the city. His armor was dusted with ash, his face calm and unreadable. Around him, the roar of triumph filled the air. Mingled with the weeping of the conquered, horses trampled the petals of broken mosaics. Doors that had been closed for centuries were thrown open to fire and sword. The last defenders were cut down in the courtyards of their fathers. Those who had prayed for deliverance now prayed for mercy. And amid the chaos, one sound rose above all the deep, solemn call of the muezzin. It drifted through the smoke, over rooftops and domes, echoing through the shell of Hagia Sophia. There, within the great church, thousands had gathered, men, women, children, priests seeking refuge beneath the dome that had witnessed a millennium of faith. As the doors burst open, the invaders poured in, their torches casting rivers of gold and red across the mosaics of Christ. And the saints, where once the choirs of Byzantium had sung, the voice of Islam now filled the void. Mehmed entered soon after. He stood beneath the dome, gazing at the mosaic of the Pantocrator, half shrouded by smoke. For a moment, he said nothing. The conqueror of worlds looked upon the face of the empire he had slain and bowed his head. In that silence, the past and future met, and the age of Byzantium breathed its last. Outside, the city burned. Bells melted in their towers. The sea was choked with wreckage and blood. From the hills beyond, the sunset glowed upon the domes, not golden, but crimson, as if the heavens themselves were bleeding for the empire that had once called itself eternal. Yet, in the midst of ruin, Mehmed ordered restraint. Let the city live. His gesture seemed to say, for he did not destroy Constantinople, he remade it. The crescent rose over the ancient skyline, and the city that had been Rome's heir became the crown of a new world. As the sun sank beyond the Bosphorus, shadows stretched across the broken walls. The empire of Constantine was gone. In its place stood something vast, fierce, and unending, the Ottoman dawn. And the wind that once carried the prayers of Byzantium now bore a different song, one that would echo through centuries. The world had turned, and a new faith ruled the old city of God. When the smoke cleared over the Bosphorus, the world was no longer the same. The city that had once been the heart of Christendom now beat to a different rhythm, the rhythm of the East. Constantinople, the queen of cities, was reborn beneath a new name, Istanbul. Yet beneath its new banners, its stones still whispered the memories of Byzantium. For the West, the fall was more than the loss of a city. It was the shattering of an illusion. The last remnant of Rome had fallen, and the old world had died with it. Kings and popes trembled, for if Constantinople could fall, what fortress was safe? What faith was unshakable. But from the ashes of fear came the first sparks of renewal. Refugees from the fallen city, scholars, philosophers, artists fled across the sea to Italy, carrying with them the manuscripts of Plato, Aristotle, and Euclid. They brought the lost language of Greece, the ancient sciences of light, the secrets of proportion and form. In the streets of Florence and Venice, they sowed the seeds of what would soon be called the Renaissance. Thus, the death of Byzantium became the birth of modern Europe. The knowledge preserved within its libraries, guarded through wars and crusades, now ignited the minds of the West. What had fallen in blood rose again in thought. Meanwhile, the Ottoman Empire ascended into its golden age. Mehmet, now known as the Conqueror, transformed the ruined city into a capital of unmatched splendor. He restored aqueducts, reopened markets, and filled the skyline with new minarets and palaces. Hagia Sophia stood unchanged, yet changed forever, its vast dome echoing new prayers in a language that had conquered the world. In time, the cross and the crescent would share the same horizon, bound not by war, but by the slow weaving of history. The city became a bridge once more between continents, between faiths, between the echoes of the past and the pulse of the future. And though the empire of Byzantium vanished from the earth, its shadow remained eternal in art, in law, in faith, in the very idea that civilization could rise again from ruin. The sea still murmurs against the old walls of Theodosius. The ravens still circle the domes at dusk. And when the sun sets over the Golden Horn, it paints the stones in crimson and gold, as if remembering both empires, both prayers, both destinies. For on that wall of faith and fire, one world ended, so another could begin. The sword of conquest had turned the page of history itself, and beneath that blood-red dawn, the voice of eternity whispered once more.
On that muddy
on
slope,
that field,
the medieval world
history
ended.
didn't end.
Courage
It transformed.
couldn't beat mathematics.